Hello everyone. Today we are going to understand the crime. This is the uh, fourth video in the series of the lecture of the crime. So as we discussed functionalist perspective. We discussed already crime and its definitions, deviance, sociological perspective, sociological imagination of crime, the relationship between sociology and criminology for that matter. Today we are going to understand the three important theories of crime, that is conflict perspective, interactionist perspective, and leveling theory. Let's start the lecture of understanding crime with reference to conflict perspective. As we know, Karl Marx was the architect of this perspective. Conflicts perspective studies matter very critically, right? And conflict theorists blame certain characteristics of capitalism as an economic system, right? Which led to the origin of crime in society. From the conflict perspective, the legal and criminal justice system are geared to benefit the dominant group in the society. Recently, a Supreme Court judge retired, and he delivered a good lecture in his farewell ceremony, and he says Indian justice system is made for the rich, not for the poor. So we can understand his concern when we understand the judicial system in India, and how when the rich having rich or powerful lawyer, and they win the case, right? So if you have a good lawyer, you will win the case irrespective of justice, right? So according to these perspectives, laws are mechanisms whereby some groups exercise control over the activities of other groups. And this perspective views the social problems of crime is not simply a matter of social disorganizations, but it is also influenced by the preference and interest of various groups in societies. So crime is bound up with conflict, right? And often a class-based nature in which crimes of powerful are much less noticed than crimes of the weak. Crime may be usually understood in terms of social division of interests, especially economic interest, right? If you see the nature of the crime with passion, right, becoming fewer and fewer in comparison against the crime against property. Crime against properties are increasing, right? So what I will do is here is to summarize the Marxist views of crime. Crime is not caused by moral or biological defects, as Durkheim states. Crime is caused because of moral defects. Psychology says crime is caused because of biological, psychological defects. As functionalists suggest, there is a conflict between the norms in society. That's why crime is happen. But as far as Marxist perspective is concerned, Marxist says crime is an inevitable feature of existing capitalist societies because it is an expression of the basic social inequalities. Just remember, while we were having discussion on Karl Marx, I said the relationship between base and superstructure, the kind of economic system you will have, the same reflection will be on superstructures. Law, morality are the aspect of superstructure, right? So working class crime results from the demoralization caused by labor exploitation, material misery, and the appalling conditions at home and in the factories. In certain respects, such crimes as theft, erosion, or sabotage may be considered a form of primitive rebellion, a protest or rebellion against bourgeois from the property ownership and the control. So Marxists, when say Marxists say seize the power, means they advocate the theft aspect, right? So crime is to be understood with class analysis, right? The extent of the form of the crime can only be understood in context of a specific class relation and the nature of the states and the law associated with particular mode of production. So some questions often arise in my mind. If crime is caused by material deprivation or poverty for that matter, why is it that not all poor commit crime? Why? Are equally important? Why do rich and professional people commit crime? If crime is related only to a structural factor, how can this account for individual choice, opportunities, and meaning? If crime is a form of primitive rebellion, why is so much crime inter-class and directed against the protest and most vulnerable section in the society? If crime is related only to class oppression, how can this explain crimes such as the racist assault, caste assault, gender assault, sexual violation, so and so forth? So if crime is a feature of capitalism and class inequalities, how can this explain the reality that most offenders are men? If you see the gun violence in America, 100% of them are men. So there is a masculinity, there is a patriarchal configuration behind the gun violence action in America. So, and if the law is an instrument of ruling class, how does it work at times in favor of poor people and against the interest of the powerful, right? So these are all my concerns. So when you study any particular theory, you must generate certain criticism, and then only you can understand theory in a relevant way. Another important theory is interactive perspective. Personally, I feel this perspective is quite relevant in terms of understanding crime. Drawing Max Weber's understanding of Western, there is a thinker called Frege argues that to achieve criminological Western, and that is a deep appreciation of lived experience of criminals and the situated meaning, emotions, and logic of crime, social researcher or criminologist must be prepared to participate in the immediacy of crime themselves. The best architect of this interactionist perspective of crime is Sutherland, who gave the theory called Differentiable Association theory. Edwin Sutherland is a good criminologist. He was the dean of American criminology. He was at Chicago only for a relative brief time, but he wrote his study on 12,000 homeless men, Protestant thief, white-collar crimes, and these are the very famous work. You must go through this work in order to explain his or understand his clinical eyes of crime. A basic principle of interactionism is that we are thinking beings who act according to how we interpret situations. Sutherland had said that crime is a product of larger number or great variety of factors, and these factors cannot now and perhaps never be organized into general propositions which have no exception. Just if you see the various explanations of the crime, the biologists attribute physical traits. Sociologists tend to stress environmental factors, conflicts, and emotional insecurity. Religionists says lack of religious and moral training is the cause behind crime. The medical expert attributed to some mental disease like insanity for matter, So, and you remember I discussed in first semester there is approach called Psychosocial Approach. That is the best approach to understand reality in sociology. Personally, I would say crime is a social phenomenon, a social behavior, a social conduct produced by combination of physical and psychological characteristics of individuals and his reaction to various sociological environments, sociological factors. Sutherland says, from the different groups we associate with, we learn to deviate from or conform to the social norms. And cultural transmission theories posits that crime and delinquency are learned and culturally transmitted through socialization. And the most influential of these theories are differential association theories. Right? So your peer groups, your neighborhood, right? If you see, many criminals are found in slum area. Why? Because they learn crime through their socialization process. So, learning to be criminal or delinquent involves mechanism to socialization similar to those associated with learning any social status. And if people have close group ties with others who conform to established group norm, they are likely to learn and conform their lifestyle, right? So I can briefly say the findings of differential association theory by Sutherland. I will say criminal behavior is learned. Criminal behavior is learned in interaction with other persons in the process of communication, right? The principal part of learning of criminal behavior occurred with intimate personal groups. When criminal behavior is learned, the learning includes techniques of committing crime, which are sometimes very complicated, sometimes very simple. And the specific direction of motives derives rationalization and attitudes. The specific direction of motives and drives is learned from definitions in legal codes as favorable or unfavorable. A person becomes criminal because an excess of definitions favorable to violation of laws over definitions unfavorable to violations of laws. Right? Differential associations may vary infrequently, durations, priority, and intensity. The process of learning criminal behavior by association with criminal and anti-criminal patterns involves all the mechanisms that are involved in any other learning. While criminal behavior is an expression of general needs and values, it is not explained by those generally needs and values, since non-criminal behavior is an expression of the same needs and the values. Right? So these are all the important consideration of conceptualization of differential association theories. Another important theory is labeling theory. Labeling theory views that labels people are given affects their own or others' perception of them, thou channeling their behavior into either deviance or conformity. One example I can give here is it is a common expression, and it is a very common experience that a child who is constantly labeled by his parents or teachers as bad, dull, or unintelligent, child gradually begin to accept his negative self-evaluation and then begin to act or behave in a similar way, right? So this is the process of labeling effect on personality development. Labeling theorist looks specifically at the consequences of labeling a person deviant. How does a society construct definitions of deviance? How and by whom these labels apply to certain people? How does labels affect a person's behavior? These are important questions which labeling theorists identify. Right? So instead of asking questions like why do people commit crime, or even why don't they do commit crime, or this theory asks what processes have led to this act being labeled as deviant and treated as such. The focus of therefore shift away from the individual, his or her motivations, family background, subcultural groups membership, relationship, to the labeling agencies themselves: police, court, media, social world agencies, state. These are all the agencies which construct or which labeled people as criminal or non-criminal. Right? So, labeling theory basically suggests that whether other person defines or label a person as deviant is a critical determinant in the development of a pattern of criminal behavior. Leveling theory suggests that many people engage in activity that are defined as criminal, at least occasionally. In all likelihood, you have engaged in few actions that could be so defined as probably have most other college students. Few of us, however, are caught or as labeled either by our friends or official agencies as criminal. So, labeling theory refers to this violation of social law in which a persons are not caught or is exhausted rather than labeled as deviant as primarily deviants, right? So it is a society which labeled. If you are a member of a conservative society, then you don't have freedom. Like in Indian society, we have more and more constraint and less choice, right? So the powerful group is here is society, religious dominant class, which labeled certain people criminal or non-criminal. Then we have another theory of explanation of crime is called control theory. Control theory is very significant because control theory says fourth thing. There is a thinker called Heinrich who identified that we have the capacity for both moral and immoral, criminal and non-criminal behavior. What prevents us from indulging in criminal behavior is neither our inherent goodness nor subcultural grouping nor social class. Rather, it is what he calls the social bond. And social bond is constructed by four things: commitment, involvement, belief, right? So, and attachment. Commitment, that is the investment of individual is prepared to make in terms of time, effort, money and status versus the cost associated with the choice not to conform, right? The greater the commitment, the more individual has to lose. Second is involvement, that is the participation in legitimate activity including employment, clubs and organization, sports. The greater the commitment to this kind of activity, the less time available for non-conforming activity. Belief is important. Belief is to the acceptance of conventional value system. Lack of acceptance of the rule of law, for example, makes law breaking more likely. Fourth is attachment. Attachment means that is the connection of an individual has to conventional people and those in authority, particularly parents or a school teacher. The stronger the attachment and the greater sensitivity to the opinion of other, the stronger the control, right? Talking about these four important considerations, and the theorist here is to give very balanced view of explanation of crime, because Henrich incorporated both psychological and sociological dimension of crime. Then we have post and modern and post-structuralist perspective also. It is clear that the discussion of criminology and sociological perspective of crime and deviance are rooted in the modernist project. And we have seen like how most postmodern conception of crime and justice questions question the modernist project, right? Enlightenment project. So uh, so we have seen the various theories of crime. Anomy theory, which focuses on the values conflict between culturally prescribed goal and socially approved way of achieving them. Then we talked about social cultural learning theories, which concern is with the way people interact and learn deviance. Then we talked about labeling theories, focuses on the meaning, definitions, and interpretations applied to action. Then we talked about conflict theory, contents that groups in power defines the acts of the weaker groups as deviant in order to exploit them. So, if you talk about the crime in India, I'm moving to the summary or conclusion part. I would recall the work or words of M.N. Roy, who states that there is a multitude of factors come into play in the causation of crime in India: nationality, racial characteristic, geographical factor, political development, and impact of modern civilization having their own measure contributed to the criminal potential of the country. Religious, social customs, superstitions, caste and communal hatred, social vendetta, alcoholism, drug addictions are other factors which have applicable influence on you know incident of crime in India. So I will send my PPT, and if you see my PPT, you will find a lot of pictures, and you will certainly understand crime in a significant manner. Thank you. And if you have any question and queries, please mail me, and I will happy to answer them. Thank you.